teach in the Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. And I sit as a trustee for the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's session. This is one of four sessions that have been organized for the summer seminar series. And we'll put the link in the chat for the other events and kind of return to that at the end. But right now, what I would like to do is to welcome you to this session and on the disastrous impacts really of Hurricane Melissa in October 2025, the impact on Jamaica's built heritage, lessons learned, and for future needs. I think this is an extremely important session for us all to. Oh,
Okay, I think we've lost Tara briefly, but should
Yeah.
we move forward? So, um, Tara, are you back?
Well, I could pick up from where she's got to, I guess,
Yes,
if
thank
that's
you.
all right.
Yeah.
Just to repeat Tara's welcome, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. Um, and this talk is being given in advance of a planned program of damage assessment, which is about to be carried out on the island starting later this month, and that'll be led by Peter Francis, who's a Jamaican conservation architect, and colleagues, and Brent Fortenberry is also um, offering his expertise. He's a specialist in British Atlantic history and is Deputy Dean of Louisiana State University. And this study, which is about to start, is being funded by a grant from the Commonwealth Heritage Forum, which is extremely helpful. Um, and we hope in due course there may be another chance to give a further presentation on the outcome of that program of assessment. Um, uh, it's also the assessment process is intended to provide an opportunity for training young professionals in the assessment of damage. In terms of what to expect today, I will start by giving a general talk about hurricanes past and future, and Peter will follow with some specific examples of buildings damaged by Hurricane Melissa, and lessons to be learnt from those. And Brent will end by talking about the process of assessment, and how that's going to be organized. And the idea is to assess a substantial number of buildings, and then in the assessment process, we'll be able to triage those that need the most urgent attention. And at the end, as I think Tara was saying, we obviously welcome any comments, thoughts, and questions. And just as a slightly frivolous start, the only, in terms of the name Melissa, the only Melissa I know is the kindest, gentlest person you could imagine. And I was interested to read that the World Meteorological Organization's Hurricane Committee has now retired Melissa from its rotating list of names because of the death and destruction it caused in the Caribbean last October. And for all any mollies online, that's going to be the new is the name that's taking the place of Melissa. So I hope that if there are mollies, that your namesake will be as gentle as possible in the future when her time comes. Anyway, we know that Melissa was the strongest hurricane ever, and of course the worry is that warming seas will increase both the frequency and the strength of hurricanes. And I just momentarily want to because it gives one an idea of what it was like. Paul Machette, who lives in Trelawney in Jamaica, described what it was like being in the house while it happened. He and his son trying to close a bedroom door upstairs and being completely unable to close it. and then the powerful wind. And then when one side of the hurricane had gone past, you suddenly were in the middle of the hurricane. And which I think is a very vivid image. He said you could drop a feather and it would go straight down onto the ground. And of course, that was a short moment. And then that's followed by the other side of the hurricane, with the wind coming in the opposite direction and further sort of really difficult and terrifying time. Anyway, on we go. So I was just going to, if I can find how to, why can't I go down? Pity, why can't I go down? Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay. This is actually rather, I thought, rather a useful image, um, which I've as you see, put the site up on there. It's got a lot of detailed information and thoughts on the hurricane belt and how hurricanes develop, and the the uh, Western Caribbean development is that not, I can't read that on there because of other images, but that's where um, hurricane storm patterns can develop, um, and reach incredible. And they obviously they originate from the west coast of Africa, and then they grow in strength crossing the Atlantic, and then when they get to the warmer seas of the Caribbean, they can intensify in strength a lot. And you can sort of track their likely destination, but anyone who knows the Caribbean is fully aware, you don't really know exactly where they're going to land until really the last moment. Um, and yeah, the band of that map, which Jamaica is in, is known as the Caribbean Development Zone, and it's where um, um, the warm Atlantic waters can form almost the strongest of um, all the hurricanes. And turning to Melissa, there she is, and you can see the satellite image of the hurricane um, as it approaches Jamaica, which is that sort of wiggly yellow line at the top of the red bit. And that's as it approaches the south coast. And these are a few slides showing the damage wrought. It reaches that dotted line shows sort of the eye of the storm. And we'll see in the next few slides the exact areas that were affected. And it lands basically at a town called Black River, which Peter will be talking about in due course, and it goes across the island and affects quite a number of significant buildings and towns, including Falmouth, Montego Bay, and on the south coast, Sav-la-Mar. And there have been various at the moment. They're obviously in the aftermath of the hurricane. The first focus was on people and ensuring that as many people were rescued and were giving homes and so on. But then there have been various assessments of the damage, but they've all been pretty general. And the idea of what we'll be doing will be much more specific and being able to assess both the damage to the building and the works required to reinstate them or to stabilize them. And that gives a brief list of buildings destroyed or damaged, and the total of them. This is again, which I think Peter will be referring to a number of buildings in Black River, and this shows you those buildings that have been destroyed or damaged, and 13% destroyed, 50% of damaged and the remainder surviving. So it was, I mean, it's really devastated town, and it's tragic because it was a very special place. And again, that gives you a clear idea um, of the passage of the hurricane and the areas that were affected. I wanted just quickly to talk about, well, about the past. And I thought I would just quickly read you because it's rather um, some about a Mr. Thistlewood. I mean, in the huge hurricane of 1751, who described who's what he saw, and it says next morning Thistlewood was amazed by the strange havoc he encountered as he toured the plantation and surrounding area. The storm-damaged houses, ruined fields, washed away wharfs that left boards, slaves, and shingles blown about as if slaves, sorry, and shingles blown about as if they were feathers. Later, walking along the coast, Thistlewood noted that there was no birds stirring and that many fish were thrown up dead upon the shore. All the woods and mountains look open and bare and very ragged. That was so true, as you will see a photograph, which we shall show you, of that, and appear like our woods in England in the fall. In the harbour at Kingston, one observer wrote, nothing was to be seen but death and destruction, members lying in the shore, drowned, and others floating on the sides, and pieces of wrecks. I should just say that, I mean, we mourn the towns that were affected by Hurricane Melissa, but there have been some merciful escapes, and one of them is Spanish Town, which is, I think, if the hurricane had hit Spanish Town, there would be nothing of Spanish Town left because it's been so neglected and not looked after, and it's a very fine town. But I wanted to show you just a few approaches in earlier centuries to um, um, building hurricane resistant buildings. And I think I'm sure this was in mind when John Tharp built Chippenham Park. It's a circular building sitting on top of a hill, and that obviously will help to disperse the winds around it. And another one image, which is perhaps not entirely clear, but that the right-hand section of that is a triangular masonry structure, the idea of which is to drive the hurricane winds past the main building, which is a very effective idea. And the other thing that is in terms of constructing these particular townhouses is you have a masonry basement, lower story, and then a timber brick with brick pugging upper floor and quite shallow shingle roofs. And usually it wasn't one big roof, you would have several lower roofs, all of which would help it to resist hurricanes. And that is the Harp House, in fact, which this is, was Falmouth suffered quite badly, but this Tharp House had a few shingles blown off, but because it had been recently renewed, and that's one of the key things, is maintenance is absolutely key in providing buildings that resist hurricanes. And you can see in this that the roof is undamaged from the inside. And this is another sad tale. This was the Barrett House in Falmouth, which that's what it looked like in the 1980s. Hurricane Gilbert, I think it was, blew it away, and the masonry story remains, but nothing has been done to revive that. And this is an interesting book produced by Adam Philogene. I don't know how his Heron, and it's called Hurricane Resistant Buildings. And he points out that after the Hurricane Maria in 2017, many of the Tikal buildings of Dominica survived even when concrete buildings and other supposedly stronger structures failed. Um, and I think it's just a general lesson to bear in mind that you don't have to build in concrete um, or concrete blocks, that you can use timber struct if it's properly framed and designed, they can survive. And I think my final slide before I hand over to is of um, 1900 hurricane that struck Galveston in Texas. Um, and this is the St. John's. This is the church in Galveston, and it's very reminiscent of a slide that you will see, I think, from Peter in due course, of what happened at St. John's Black River, where the tower still stands. I mean, the chancel still largely stands, and the nave has been blown away. And it's interesting that that is so similar to what's happened in Black River. So I think I've come to the end of what a few things I was going to say. I could have said more about the history of hurricanes, but um, you've probably had enough from me. Um, and Peter, would you like to take on if I shut down my shared screen and you start?
Sure, that was enlightening. Thank you very much, Peregrine. I will try and see if I can organize to get my offering in place. Is that up and running or?
It's there.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. All right. So thank you very much, Peregrine. Okay, Tara, I'm not sure how much time I have. Probably about 20 minutes, I think.
I think
Um,
I think we want to have I would probably give you about 10 minutes,
10 minutes.
12
Okay,
minutes.
well,
Yeah.
that's not much time. All right, so I'm gonna be rushing through this because uh, this is an image-rich offering, but the idea is to try and talk about lessons learned from Hurricane Melissa. So, um, if I can move this along, how do I do that? Oh, uh, why is it not responding to me?
Do you want
Am
to
I
try
going
the
the wrong direction?
cursor? Or just advance the
I,
slide, the cursor?
uh,
You've
let's
got a
see.
right button on your.
All right, there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
Cursor is
there you
doing
go.
it. All right, so everybody is now aware of what happened on October the 28th in the St. Elizabeth area, basically in the area around White House is when that fierce storm started to head to the northeast. And Black River was in its path, and these slides are showing what the threats from a storm like Melissa does. So the high winds, the storm surge, the excessive rainfall, and the flooding. And the result is devastation of not just buildings but landscapes. The impacts of Melissa were on infrastructure, were on buildings, were on trees, landscape crops, power infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewerage. There was coastal erosion. There was landslides. The one I've shown you there is actually in St. Andrew, 100 miles away to the east. So you can imagine the sort of damage that happened in in areas closer to the epicenter, and flooding, of course. So there was devastation generally. Um, in terms of building types, we had damage to all types of structures in the areas primarily impacted in the 4 to 5 parishes to the west. The public buildings, institutional buildings, commercial buildings, and of course, residential buildings were a massive impact. The In terms of the buildings, we had damage to sites. We had serious roof damage. We had serious structural damage, infrastructure damage, obviously damage to contents, and of course, landscaping. The bottom left image shows the clearance that happened a few days after in Black River of one of the heritage buildings by the municipality. So, to compound the damage from Melissa, we also had the municipality clearing debris prematurely. And that was one of the lessons learned, really, is that we have to make sure that people are aware of what not to damage, to knock down, simply because it's perceived as vulnerable. So the causes that we see that need to be mitigated are, in historic buildings, are the fact that buildings have survived multiple events. The buildings that are 100 and more years old, they've obviously survived multiple events. So we have a lot to learn from them. All the buildings that we are focused on were built with traditional materials: stone, brick, timber, nog, variations of those. There's Spanish wall construction as well. All the buildings damaged are showing signs of inadequate maintenance. And frankly, as Peregrine said, all the buildings that are shown and had serious damage and catastrophic damage had never experienced impacts comparable to Melissa, with sustained winds over 200 miles an hour. In terms of religious sites, I wanted to show you a range of the religious sites that we have seen and which have varying degrees of damage. So the two to the top left in St. Mark's, those had been damaged in the previous hurricane, which was Hurricane Beryl in June 2024, and they had done repairs to the roof. Now, in fact, there are a number of structures which, because they'd had repairs in Beryl, had managed to survive Melissa. And this St. Mark's in Southfield is one of them. But despite that, there was still some major damage. And I've sort of highlighted in blue areas where the wind was actually causing severe damage to the stonework. In St. Thomas in Lacovia, you see the type of damage, catastrophic damage to the roof trusses and damage to the walls resulting in the gable end resulting. In St. Matthew's, which is my family church in Catadupa, in St. James, again, a similar pattern of the damage between the roof and the main stone walls. Thankfully, in Trelawney at the parish church, they had repairs done to the roof, which meant that they lost roof coverings, but the roof is intact, the structure is intact. In St. Michael's, in Kew Park, catastrophic damage to the stonework and the roof resulting. Ramble is another one, bottom left, bottom right, which suffered catastrophic damage to its stonework and roofwork. Now, in Black River, that Peregrine spoke about, here are some examples. The top are the buildings as they were before Melissa. Below are the resulting damage to those same structures. And of course, St. John's, bottom right, is the one that we're sort of focusing on. That's the one where we're trying to consolidate the damage and rehabilitate St. John's. So we're in the fundraising process for that. Before St. John's was damaged, we actually had problems with Beryl, and even before Beryl, there were problems with settlement. The slide on the right-hand side shows where Peregrine intervened with the Jamaica Heritage Renewal to try and help us to consolidate some of the settlement that was happening to the gallery, the timber supports to the gallery. And in the process of evaluating that, we got termite evaluations and treatment done, which resulted in clarification to the extent of damage to the roof trusses, which meant that the trusses were severely impacted by termite damage. And and that there was an enormous program of maintenance that was planned, which was in the design phase. Clive Dawson of Jamaica Heritage Renewal was in the process of designing structural replacements to those massive ties to the bottom cords of those trusses. And then Hurricane Melissa struck. And when Hurricane Melissa struck, this is the result of the damage that we have to St. John's Parish Church. The winds came from the left, and basically, partly because of the connection which had been severed between the massive brick walls and the roof trusses which were sitting on top of them. The walls basically rotated to the north. The tower, as you see, was strong enough to withstand those forces, but the nave and the parts of the chancel succumbed to that. And so the result is that we have a catastrophic damage that has been done to the church, which is going to require complete reconstruction of the nave. So just a few examples here, just to show you the sort of vulnerabilities that were in place. You notice in the left-hand slide that there were fairly thick brick walls, but those ties which were connecting the timber structure to those walls and keeping lateral support, those ties had rusted off. And so one of the things that we're trying to understand is in buildings going forward, how is the relationship between those very large masonry walls and the timber supports that are supporting the roof. The lateral stabilities and lateral strength of those masonry walls needs to be reevaluated. But I think the lesson to be learned is very much about maintenance. And so very quickly running through a list of 10 things that we can have: UV damage, which impacts roof fixings. We can have termite damage that impacts a number of timber connectors and primary and secondary structure. We can have corrosion that causes problems and leaks. We can have water damage, which damages walls and timber connectors. We can have inadequate repairs that undersizes elements and provides multiple timber joints. We can have lack of continuity, which is what happened at St. John's, where the stiffness of the timber trusses is now compromised, so those walls don't have lateral stiffness. We can have no strapping and or shear connectors, which means that the walls and roofs are not properly tied together. We can have lateral instability, which means that the structure doesn't resist horizontal forces. We can have wind uplift vulnerability, which means that the roof slopes are too shallow. And the image that Peregrine showed in his first slide showed why a lot of those roofs, which were very shallow, were exposed to uplift. And then finally, and it's one of the things why Mochette had problems closing the doors, is that you have to understand that wind pressure also builds up in these structures and prevents you from and will actually impact the uplift of these buildings. So I'm going to hand over to Brent, who's going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing to sort of evaluate structures in the West that were impacted and how we can learn these lessons moving forward. And through training and other means, we can hopefully, stabilize and stiffen some of these heritage buildings to make them more resistant to future hurricanes. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Brent, you can pull up your slides.
Everyone see those okay?
Yep.
I believe so. Let me just I think the text for me is cut
the
off a
bottom is
little
clipped
bit.
off.
Yeah.
It slipped to the bottom.
Well, I'll go ahead and continue. There's not a lot of text, it's a lot of imagery on my slides.
Great.
Um, so thanks, Peter and Peregrine. Please jump in if you have anything to add in what I'm speaking about. So I was pulled into this project to talk about how how we can leverage technology to go out and survey at the building level to understand the impact on structures impacted by Melissa across the island. So I've been lucky enough to be a part of similar recovery efforts both here in the United States, in South Carolina, and on the Gulf Coast, but then also other places in the Caribbean, and Greater Caribbean. Um, so one of the challenges in the recovery efforts is how do you get out and how do you assess what's there? So there's been a couple of efforts so far. First and foremost, by UNITAR and UNISAT, who are the satellite centers associated with the United Nations, and so what they have undertaken so far is a remote assessment using satellite imagery of heritage sites across the island to try and understand at a satellite level what the potential impact has been on built heritage resources. So after the hurricane, as many of you know, NOAA, which is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Association administration, sorry, in the United States, they flew a series of low altitude flights across the island directly after the hurricane to gather sort of high resolution imagery. And so what that did was that allowed a picture of before and after the hurricane to see what the potential impact was that could be seen from the air. And so Unisat took that imagery and then using the available identified heritage sites on the island, which you see here, all the square boxes here are identified heritage sites. I should say that this assessment is drawn directly from the ArcGIS online layer that is available on the GNHT website. As we know, this does not encompass all of the heritage sites on the island. This encompasses those identified in that publicly accessible layer. And you can see most of them are clustered around Kingston in the lower right-hand corner of the image here. And so what they did was they used that satellite imagery and from the before and after um, images, they assessed at sort of a very sort of high level what the potential damage of these identified heritage sites are. So they went parish by parish and they identified all those sites based on that ArcGIS layer, and then they sort of postulated based on the before and after image what the potential damage was. So damage, no visible damage, and whatnot. And so all this is in a report that's published online. Um, that you can find on the Unisat website. And so what they did here, you sort of see on the image.
Sorry, Brent,
You,
the image isn't
yeah,
showing up.
Yeah, sorry. I think you're still on the first slide. Thanks.
let's do this. Um,
Thank you for the person that put their hand up.
let's do this. Can you all see it now? What about
Yeah,
now?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Crescent Park house and site. And then
Yeah. Um, and sorry, I didn't see the chat at the bottom that indicated. So for those, well, everyone didn't see this. So this is the image of the high resolution um, overhead satellite imagery that NOAA did directly after the hurricane. And then they took that layer that's on the JHT website and assessed the individual identified um, heritage sites on that, whether they were destroyed, damaged, no visible damage, and whatnot. And so this is what they did essentially. They took on the left here at Crescent Park House and Site, they took a 2024 image on the left, and then they compared that with the 2025 image on the right. And so they identified at sort of, again, that satellite level, what the potential impact has been on each site. Here is at Marshall's Pen. They did the same thing. They sort of identified a damaged building, missing tiles off the roof, and then possible damage for the roof. The challenge here is that this is it doesn't represent all the heritage sites on the island, as we all know, but then also this is at a global level, an aerial level of impact. You really cannot understand the full impact on these heritage sites by doing this at sort of the remote sensing level. And so, really, we came together as a group to think about how we could go out in teams and identify at the ground level and do an assessment of the impact on heritage sites specifically. And this is a map from Map Action that's also available online. That shows sort of the impacted areas and the wind impact, both in the Black River area and then in Falmouth in particular. Um, how do we then collect and collate all this data with teams through an assessment methodology? And then how does that ultimately, how can that data then effectively be collated and begin to speak to a broader level map like this? So, I'd propose that we use something called Survey 123, which is an app that's available through Esri, which is a geospatial software company that any planning office, I'm sure that many of you have heard this acronym before. It is a geospatial tool that allows you to locate resources on the ground. And so what we did as a group was we came together using the UNESCO form as well as form from the National Park Service to develop um, a survey that would allow us to go on the ground in teams and collate information. So the survey that we developed and will be deploying in the next few weeks um, identifies sort of major sort of building elements, what the type of construction is, what the building foundation is, and ultimately will allow you to identify sort of pre-event information. So what's the overall nature of the building? What's the building itself? And then that building morphology. So what's the roof material? What's the building foundation? What's the wall finish? And also whether it's been listed on the heritage register as well. And then from that right of way, you can then begin to do your assessment, sort of that post-event information. What level of damage has been impacted by the building? And then moving through this evaluation matrix, what are the impacts of the storm on the actual structure? So is the foundation off? Is there structural damage? Is there damage to the windows and doors? Is the parapet falling off? Has there been roof damage, foundation damage? And all this is sort of collated in a survey that individuals undertake on either their phone or their iPad. Um, if it seems safe enough, surveyors will go inside of a building and look at structural damage. Is there falling plaster? Is there falling interior finish? And then list any of those sort of immediate actions. And then also list if there's structural damage. At the end of that, then there's that ultimate hazard identification. So is there electrical hazard? Is there lead? Is there asbestos, chemical, mold, structural damage, and ultimately make a recommendation. So if you've ever used a Google form where you're entering information and then it's collated into a spreadsheet, it's the same idea. It's just the ultimate sort of reference of this survey is a geo-reference. So as you're filling this out, your phone or your iPad uh, records where you are on the surface of the earth. And so what that allows you to do is that allows you to then collate all this information across disparate places. And so we'll be sending teams out to Black River, to Falmouth, Montego Bay, and everywhere sort of in between to record the damage that they see in this digital form and allow us to bring everything together into a single platform. So at the end of that, also, you record images using your phone, you can record audio, and then ultimately take a photograph of a sketch as well. So this form is providing a repository for all this information that could ultimately be used to triage, which buildings have been damaged the most. How can we make resources available to those resources that are most damaged? How do we make choices based on limited resources for repair and reconstruction? ultimately, what this is going to look like is a survey that I've done and others have done in other places where it'll be an interactive map where you can click on individual points and then the information that's collected will pop up. So this is a survey that I did with students a number of years ago in Roebuck Street in Barbados, as well as one in Antigua and St. John, where all the information, every dot on this map is someone standing in front of the building with the survey and completing all the questions within the survey and then taking photographs. So you see here this example here from St. John's. It has the person recorded how old the building was, what its use, what its stories is, what's its primary roof form, what's its materials. So everything that's on that survey will effectively be articulated within this interactive map. That in my efforts to do a live demo, I'm just going to share a web browser really quickly. So what will happen is effectively you'll have an interactive map like this. So this is a live web page that you can zoom in and out, and you will be able to drill down in and select a survey, and then the information will come up. And so this will be incredibly useful as the JNHT and others begin to think about triaging all this information to get resources to where they need to go within the impacted areas. And all this information will be able to be collated with that existing heritage database and that existing map that is managed by the JNHT to better understand the impact of the heritage resources within the impact areas, particularly in Black River, Falmouth, and Montego Bay, and in between. So we'll be doing this in the next 2 weeks, and hopefully we'll be able to share with you all the results of that. But this is just sort of one way that we're trying to integrate all this information from disparate places together to ultimately make choices about how we can recover from Hurricane Melissa.
Thank you. That was expertly done. We have some time for questions. I wanted to apologize again for my the brevity of my introduction. I wanted to really open to say, a lot of us felt, whether it was in the UK or across the Caribbean, we felt really ourselves devastated by what happened during Hurricane Melissa. And of course, nobody ever really wants to think about the impact on structures immediately and all kinds of hazards that are going to affect heritage buildings. Everybody's very, very much concerned and focused, rightfully, on lives and livelihoods. But I think as we kind of move into this space of recovery now, it becomes more and more important to think about how we recover from the actual damage to buildings, not only heritage buildings, but all housing stock in our territories. So I wanted to ask anybody if they wanted to put any questions into the chat. You can do so, or possibly we have a little bit of time. If you wanted to raise your hand, we could maybe take a question from the audience. But I think what we have had here are some really great initial assessments. So we know what has happened. We don't know the extent of what has happened everywhere. Certainly, maintenance of heritage buildings seems to be of grave importance. So ongoing maintenance and of course mitigation of risks so that we can attend to livelihoods immediately after and deal with heritage buildings in good time if they are well prepared for the initial shock of the hazard and the emergency immediately. And then I really liked Brent's kind of practical approach now. What is it that we can do on the ground to assess and move forward? And where is it that we're going to use technology and leverage technology to do this? I see a question here from Richard Hughes. Are you exchanging with those that do the same for earthquakes by USGS and EEFIT, etc.? I see many commonalities for methodologies. Certainly, there are also impacts from volcanoes and seismic risks as well. So I don't know what other what other emergencies this technology can be deployed immediately. So if you could maybe comment on that, Brent. Thanks.
Yeah, it is one of the challenges and I think one of the things that why I'm excited about this project is because we're not just doing the assessment, we're also training heritage people in the heritage workforce to use these kinds of tools. And so whether it be a hurricane, whether it be a flood, whether it be an earthquake, a similar sort of recovery survey can be used and they'll know how to leverage it so then teams can go all around. One of the real sort of the jump going from paper forms, which are very, very reliable, to something like this is that multiple teams can record all at the same time. They don't need to have any sort of internet connection or anything. It all gets stored on your phone. And then when you get back to Wi-Fi, it uploads into all one place. So you can literally send hundreds of people out. If those of you might remember the devastating wildfires in California over the last few years, they have sent hundreds of people out with survey forms like this to record damage assessment across the state. So the hope is that a similar sort of recovery ethic using similar forms can be used for future hazards. We know that hazards will more than likely become, regular occurrences. 100-year floods are now going to be 50-year floods. So with this training, we can hopefully begin to deploy and educate practitioners in the heritage workforce to think about leveraging these moving forward for the next sort of hazard event.
Thanks. Thanks for that response. There's like another question here from Mark Martin asking about whether there's been any initial assessment for Hanover. Hanover sustained devastating damage. I guess it wasn't necessarily depicted in the slides today and some of the images that were shared, but maybe Peter, I'm not sure if you know Brent, but certainly Peter might have an idea of Hanover.
Uh, Interestingly, I mean, Hanover obviously, contains uh, quite a lot of heritage, particularly in places like Lucy. Funnily enough, there's a church called Ramble in which I thought was in St. James, which is actually in Hanover. So actually, Hanover kind of got brushed, I think. Of course, it's the northeast quadrant of these storms which is most fierce, and the storm, I think, sort of passed sort of over the eastern edge of Hanover. So thankfully, I feel, Hanover, and of course, Negril, the famous tourist resort, is also there. There was damage, but the damage that we are prioritizing is primarily to the parishes which were kind of on that eastern side of the storm. So St. Elizabeth, St. James, Trelawney, and of course Westmoreland has because literally that's where the storm entered. That's where I think the focus has been. Um, but yes, I mean, I think Hanover was spared to some extent as a result of this. So we're not focusing so heavily on Hanover on this occasion, but whatever lessons are learned would be applied across the entire island.
Thanks for that,
Um,
Peter. Rowena Malone in the chat has a couple of questions. Where will the funding come from for repairs, rebuilding of historic buildings? And are there controls to ensure the quality or accuracy of works to historic buildings, I suppose, if they get funded? And I guess this is always a ticklish question in the Caribbean because we don't have tremendous resources to repair or restore every building. So maybe Peter, you might have more insights on that on the ground.
Well, I tell you, we're really hoping that there's an international effort to help, particularly on the heritage side. Understand that we are focused on heritage. Obviously, the need is everything. I mean, hospitals, people's houses. There's needs everywhere. I mean, we had a project in St. Andrew where the entire uh, site slid down the hill. So the fact is that there is need far greater than we can cope within a generation. So we're hoping that there will be an international effort generally. In terms of heritage, there are some very important heritage structures like St. John's in Black River and many, many others, which we are hoping, can find sympathetic funding. The fact is, there's an organization locally which has now gone through Parliament, which has quite a large budget to it, which is about to start ramping up, which is specifically earmarked at Hurricane Melissa recovery. But the fact is that the priority for these funds is going to be, hospitals, people's houses. I don't know to what extent St. John's Church is going to benefit from, the massive need that it has out there from these funds. So the fact is that there will just never be enough to go around. So we have to do international fundraising, hopefully, particularly to focus on the heritage properties that we are focused on here.
Could I just chip in and answer to another part of Rowena's question? It's one of the sadnesses, really, is that there is very little um, um, enforcement of works to historic buildings. I mean, people tend to do whatever they want, and there's no one there to say stop. And we've lost some very, very precious buildings because of the inadequacies of the planning system. But I mean, we have to face that. But I mean, at least there are people on island, including Peter and his practice, who we can rely on to do things in a proper way. But it's a struggle.
Can I just make a prod for UNESCO? UNESCO and CER have given some money to stabilize and salvage historical debris to stabilize the tower at St. John's. So there are organizations external to Jamaica which have been helping. Um, and the fact is that we do need to prioritize preventative maintenance, prevention better than cure. And so going forward, and we're just starting, the 2026 hurricane season, we do need to make people understand the simple things that they can do to prevent needing to go and find money to rebuild walls and roofs.
Mm. Oh, could I just chip in with a little thing I meant to say over the hurricanes? A little bit of optimistic news. The forecasters with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Associations, National Weather Service, they're predicting below normal hurricane season this year for the Atlantic Basin, and the outlook for 2026, which runs, as you know, as Peter said, it starts now and ends more or less in November. And they predict a 35% chance of a near normal season, a 10% chance of a above normal season, and a 55% chance of a below normal season. So there's a little bit of encouraging news if we believe it.
It can only be encouraging if we do as what Peter suggested and try to do all the assessment, yes, but also think about how to prevent future damage. So take that time to really take stock. So that's what our homework is, I think, coming out of this. I'll just take, if I can get at least one of these questions in. One is from Tishana Willoughby. Asking about when the training assessment will take place for heritage personnel in Jamaica. And I understand a level of training had taken place a number of months ago, but as it pertains to historic structures or buildings, maybe there's some separate training that needs to happen.
Yes, there's a training which is happening next week, Tuesday. And I don't think Brent is aware that we've moved it to next week, Tuesday. So the Heritage Trust is making space and personnel available. So next week, Tuesday, we'll be having a training day in Port Royal. And then on the 22nd, through, I think, to the 26th of June, we're going to be in the field carrying out these assessments that Brent has described.
If I can, Rachel, I can maybe squeeze in one, maybe two, if we keep the responses brief, and then we'll wrap up because we finish at 7 o'clock. A kind of a very important question here. Was there any salvage of building materials? Can these be used or reused to create replicas? I don't know, Peter, if you have a sense of that very quickly.
Yes, yes, we're salvaging as much material as possible. In fact, there was one photograph that showed the Heritage Trust salvaging bricks from St. John's. We will salvage as much as we can. Of course, the church in the case of St. John's wants to get back to business, and so they're very wary of putting back timber and so on. This is one of the conversations we're having right now. Is what can we salvage, and is it prudent to salvage? That's a discussion that we're having, and hopefully, coming out of this assessment, we can have another discussion about that.
Thank you. And there's one last question. It's a big question. I don't think we'll answer it here, but I think it is something for us to think about, especially ahead of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Antigua later this year. Can you link the recovery program for historic assets to the UN SDGs and raise needs at the next COP meeting and other international fora? I would imagine just to kind of keep this on as a priority, at least at the international level, for assistance. It's just something for us to reflect on. And I think within our capacity at the CHF, I think we'll take that into consideration. I want to thank all of our panelists today for their really brilliant presentations and allowing us to have an insight into what is happening. And I wanted to just express my great appreciation for Jamaican colleagues in the built heritage and cultural heritage wider space for all of their dedication and hard work. I know it's been a really difficult time. Just the psychological trauma of not having water and electricity for months on end is so devastating for everyone on the island. I know that for a fact. And I really want to thank you for your continued efforts. And I hope that people here today can think a little bit about how they might be able to assist and maybe even reach out, maybe through the CHF to if you have something to offer, maybe that's something that we can do just as an immediate activity after this session. I want to thank Rachel for managing the chat and everything behind the scenes. And I want to remind everyone of the next CHF seminar, which is June 17th on Georgetown, Guyana, Reimagining the Garden City of the Caribbean by Francis Maud, one of our trustees as well. So we're staying in the Caribbean for at least for the next 2 weeks. And I really encourage everyone here to continue to come out to these to the series and contribute where you can. Thanks to Brent, thanks to Peregrine, and of course to Peter and everyone here on the call. I want to thank you for your presence and for your thoughtful questions. We will close right at 7 o'clock on time. Unprecedented for the Caribbean, I'm sure.
Bravo.
Yeah, no, it's but thank you so much for your kind attention.